The day Clint Eastwood stood up for kindness, it was an ordinary afternoon at Jake's Diner, a cozy little restaurant nestled in the heart of Carmel by the Sea, California. The place had a rustic charm, with wooden booths, a checkered floor, and the smell of fresh coffee always lingering in the air. The employees there were like family, especially Benny, a young man with Down syndrome who had been working as a server for the past 2 years. Benny was loved by almost everyone who came through the doors. His bright smile, infectious laugh, and genuine kindness made him a favorite among the regulars. He took great pride in his work, ensuring that every customer felt welcome. But not everyone appreciated Benny's warm spirit. On this particular day, a man named Carl walked into the diner. He was a well-dressed businessman in his late 40s, wearing a tailored suit and expensive watch. He had the air of someone who thought he was better than everyone else. He was impatient, irritable, and, as it turned out, cruel. Benny greeted Carl with his usual enthusiasm. "Hi, sir. Welcome to Jake's Diner. Would you like a booth or a table?" he asked, beaming. Carl barely looked up from his phone. "Booth," he grunted. Benny led him to a booth by the window and handed him a menu. "Our special today is, yeah, just get me a coffee and don't take all day about it," Carl snapped. Benny, unfazed, nodded. "Of course, sir. Right away." As Benny walked to the counter to get the coffee, Carl muttered under his breath, "Ugh, they let people like that work here?" Unfortunately, his words were overheard, not just by a few nearby customers, but by a man sitting in the corner, quietly sipping his coffee. That man was none other than Clint Eastwood. The Hollywood legend was a regular at Jake's Diner, though he never made a big deal about it. He preferred to keep a low profile, enjoying the simple pleasure of a good meal and good company. He was dressed casually. Jeans, a brown leather jacket, and a hat that cast a shadow over his famous squint. Most people didn't even realize who he was at first glance. Carl, however, was too absorbed in his own self-importance to notice. When Benny returned with the coffee, Carl snatched it from his hand without so much as a thank you. He took a sip and immediately grimaced. "This is cold," he barked. "Do you even know how to do your job?" Benny's smile faltered. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll get you a fresh one." Carl rolled his eyes. "Yeah, you do that. And try not to mess it up this time." As Benny hurried away, Clint Eastwood set down his cup and slowly stood up. His tall frame, even at his age, carried an undeniable presence. He walked over to Carl's booth, his boots clicking against the tiled floor. Carl finally noticed him and raised an eyebrow. "Can I help you?" Clint's piercing gaze locked onto him. His voice was low, steady, and unmistakably Eastwood. "You know," he said, "I've been coming to this diner for years, and I've never seen anyone treat that kid the way you just did." Carl scoffed. "Look, I don't have time for this. If the service is bad, I have the right to complain." Clint didn't move. "Bad service? That kid's got more heart in his little finger than you've got in your whole body." Carl let out a short, nervous laugh. "Oh, come on. Are you seriously getting worked up over this?" Clint leaned in slightly, his eyes narrowing. "You ever see a punk in a Western who mouths off too much? Ever notice what happens to him?" Carl swallowed hard. He finally realized who he was talking to. His bravado wavered. "Look, I didn't mean anything by it," Carl muttered, shifting in his seat. Clint didn't break eye contact. "You meant every word. And I think it's time for you to leave." Carl hesitated, glancing around. The whole diner was silent, watching. The weight of embarrassment settled on him. With a frustrated sigh, he threw a few bills on the table and grabbed his coat. "Whatever. This place sucks anyway," he muttered as he stormed out. The second the doors swung shut behind him, the diner erupted in quiet applause. Benny returned with a fresh cup of coffee, oblivious to what had just happened. "Here you go, sir," he said cheerfully, setting it down in front of Clint. Clint smiled and patted Benny on the shoulder. "Thanks, kid. I appreciate it." Benny grinned. "Anytime, sir." As he walked away, Clint picked up his coffee and took a sip. It was perfect. He glanced around at the other customers, nodded once, then leaned back in his seat. Justice had been served. As the diner returned to its usual hum of conversation, Clint Eastwood settled back into his booth, sipping his coffee with quiet satisfaction. Benny went about his work as if nothing had happened, greeting new customers with his ever-present smile. But behind the counter, the owner of Jake's Diner, a stocky man named Jake himself, was watching with a mix of pride and anger. He wiped his hands on a towel and muttered, "I swear, if I ever see that jerk in here again." A waitress, Maggie, leaned on the counter. Clint sure put him in his place. Jake chuckled. Yeah, he did. But you know what? I think Benny handled it better than any of us. Maggie nodded. He always does. Never lets the bad ones get to him. Meanwhile, outside the diner, Carl was fuming as he stomped toward his car. He yanked open the door, but before he could climb in, a voice stopped him. Hey, mister. Carl turned to see a group of young men in their early 20s standing nearby, watching him. One of them, a tall guy with a buzz cut and a leather jacket, stepped forward. You think it's cool to treat people like that? The young man asked, crossing his arms. Carl scoffed. Mind your own business, kid. But the young man shook his head. That guy in there? Benny? He's my cousin. He's worked hard to be where he is. And people like you think you can just walk all over him. Carl hesitated. He was still rattled from his encounter with Clint Eastwood. He wasn't about to start a fight now. Look, just what? The young man cut in. Just showed everyone exactly what kind of person you are? Carl had no response. He sighed in frustration, got into his car, and sped off, leaving behind nothing but a cloud of dust and a reputation in shambles. Back in the diner inside, Clint Eastwood was finishing his coffee when Benny walked over. Sir, would you like a refill? Benny asked with a hopeful smile. Clint smiled. The diner settled back into its normal rhythm after Carl and Lisa left. The hum of conversation returned, the smell of fresh pancakes filled the air, and the bell over the door jingled as new customers came and went. But something was different. People who had witnessed the exchange seemed to carry a bit more warmth in their interactions. The kindness Benny had shown Carl, even after being treated so poorly, had left an impact. Benny, oblivious to the ripple effect he had created, continued working as usual, greeting each new guest with the same enthusiasm. But as he walked past Clint Eastwood's booth, he noticed something. Clint was staring at him, that signature squint in place, like he was sizing up an outlaw in an old western. Benny paused. Is everything okay, sir? Clint leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. Tell me something, kid. Do you always forgive people that easy? Benny tilted his head. Yeah, why not? Clint chuckled. Well, most folks don't. Most folks hold on to things. Benny shrugged. Holding on to bad stuff makes my heart feel heavy. And I like my heart to feel light. Clint stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. That's a good way to be. Martha, who had been eavesdropping, leaned in with a smirk. Maybe the world needs more Bennies, huh? Clint gave a slow nod. Yeah, I think you're right. A moment later, Clint reached into his pocket and pulled out his leather wallet. He slipped out a crisp $100 bill and placed it under his empty coffee cup. Then, he stood up, grabbing his coat. Benny quickly tried to hand it back. Oh, sir, I think you made a mistake. Your bill was only $5. Clint grinned. No mistake, kid. That's for you. Benny's eyes widened. Me? What? Clint rested a hand on Benny's shoulder. Because good people deserve to be reminded that they matter. And you, kid, you matter. Benny blinked a few times, then gave Clint the biggest smile yet. Wow. Thank you, sir. Clint tipped his hat and gave a little smirk. Keep that heart light, Benny. With that, he turned and made his way toward the exit. The whole diner watched as the legendary Clint Eastwood strolled out the door, disappearing into the California sun. Benny stood there, still holding the $100 bill, completely in awe. Then, after a moment, he looked around, spotted Martha, and ran over to her. Martha, do you think I can use this to buy pies for everyone? I want to make people happy. Martha burst out laughing and pulled Benny into a hug. Oh, Benny, I think that's the best idea I've heard all day. And so, that afternoon, the entire diner was treated to free slices of pie on Benny. Laughter and joy filled the restaurant as customers shared stories, made new friends, and for just a little while, the world felt like a better place. All because of one young man with a kind heart and one legendary cowboy who reminded everyone that sometimes real heroes don't wear badges or carry guns. Sometimes they just drink coffee, stand up for what's right, and tip big.